Hey, what's up, and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where today we're bringing it back to our James Bond rewatch marathon with the 11th film in the series, Moonraker, which, if I recall correctly, was the film I originally scored the highest in the Moore generation, but I could be wrong. We'll see about that, though, because there were certainly moments in the previous film that I considered to be iconic James Bond moments, and this was, well, James Bond in space, which is clearly goofy, but even so, is it enough to disport while watching? Let's get cracking. This review is brought to you by the word of the day, disport. To enjoy oneself unrestrainedly, like when you play Wii Bowling while on lockdown. Moonraker takes James Bond to California, then to Venice and Rio de Janeiro in search of a missing space shuttle aptly named the Moonraker. The search takes them to the very mysterious Drax who funded the Moonraker in the first place, and James Bond slowly learns of a secret space-bound plan that Drax has, along with a handful of beautiful people. Wow. So, plot-wise, this is more or less the same exact story as The Spy Who Loved Me, in that you had the main villain who wanted to destroy the Earth so that everybody had no choice but to live underwater, and Drax wants to do something similar while living in space. There is more to it than that, given, and you'll have to watch the movie for yourself to figure that out. Here's a hint, though. It has something to do with the beautiful people that Drax is taking into space. You know what? I do like this movie, even though it's nowhere near as iconic as I think The Spy Who Loved Me is. Truthfully, thinking back, the only thing that I really remembered about Moonraker was the final 30 minutes, aka the stuff in space. I mean, sure, that's easy enough to remember as it changes up the formula a little bit, but there's a bit more to it than that. Moonraker is one of the first Bond films to really have a massive character arc, especially for a villain. For Moonraker, it's Jaws who has his own personal journey that he has to go through from beginning to end. I mean, I honestly liked what they did with his character here. Now, sure, it was a bit goofier than his role in Spy Who Loved Me, but it was still a transformable role, and again, one of the first characters in the series as a whole to really transform this much. And personally, I think that's huge. Also, Drax is a bit more of a memorable villain than Stromberg in The Spy Who Loved Me. I mean, sure, he looks like a really tall Peter Dinklage, but his motivations are slightly more logical than those of Stromberg's in the last film. The more I think about these movies back to back, the more I understand that I love The Spy Who Loved Me for the iconic Bond sequences and hate it for its kind of lack of story. And it's kind of the opposite for Moonraker, where I much prefer this villain and this story and the quest for clues that ultimately leads Bond to outer space, but it's lacking in iconic Bond moments. I mean, sure, the stuff in space is kind of iconic, but it's also extremely aged, too. There's a part in the movie where people are shooting lasers back and forth in space, pew, 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 and the entire thing is laughably bad. They clearly wanted to be the next Star Wars or Star Trek at this point, because those movies had just come out to theaters. This is 1979. Now, trust me, I understand the inspiration behind coming up with a space film. I do. Thankfully, the stuff in space is only in the final half hour, though. I'm not sure what I would have thought of the movie if the entire thing took place in space. At the end of the day, a better, more logically founded story is what wins it for me in the battle between The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. Like I said, the two stories are remarkably similar, but this one made a little bit more sense and had a more natural and organic pacing which acts as a really good lead-up. It doesn't have the iconic moments that The Spy Who Loved Me did, but it did have a couple of memorable moments. One was the stuff in space as a whole, and there was 3 other moments that lured me in, which was the fight behind the clock tower, the fight on top of the gondolas, and the opening skydiving sequence where Bond was free-falling without a parachute that looked more practical than it probably was, which means that it was shot really well. Each of these sequences left an impression on me in the best possible way. Let's take a look at that final score, which is very, very similar to that of The Spy Who Loved Me. My unbiased score basically says that this does everything that it needs to do to tell a compelling spy narrative, except maybe some of the age stuff in space, which brings it down a little bit to 68%, but my bias score is a lot higher at 88% because there's definitely moments in this movie to love, averaging everything up to a final score of 78%, 78 out of 100 possible stars, granting this letter grade of C+, and it was scored 1% higher than The Spy Who Loved Me because, like I said, the two films are pretty similar in general, but when you think about these movies, Moonraker will come out as more memorable, for better or worse. You decide. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this movie, though. What did you think about it? Is it corny in a good way, or is it corny in a bad way? Let me know. As for YouTube, you know what you should do. Hit the subscribe button if you like this review, because there is more like it coming out. Hit the thumbs up button, because that always helps out my channel. And don't forget about the little bell icon, because that'll help notify you when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace out!